Okay, so can you see it clearly?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So today I'm gonna talk about few concepts or few mathematical concepts of shapes and how to deform them, which is mainly looking at the essence of things and finding their core structure, more or less. I'll try to, it will be really vague. So for the mathematicians who are attending here, I might be a little bit, not that rigorous. So don't get mad at me. So, all right. So there are many fields in mathematics that study the core structures of objects. By that we mean to find the main properties that allows us to distinguish between the shapes. Such fields are, for example, topology, differential geometry, Riemannian geometry, conformal geometry, projective geometry, contact and symplectic geometries. And there is a longer list actually. So, but those are a few of them that mainly study the shapes and the deformation of objects. So these are vague terms and sometimes technical to read from a textbook or a math textbook. So we will try here to give some intuition on some of these fields and some of their applications. Okay, why do we care about them? Okay, so let's start by topology. So topology mainly studies the structure or the shape of objects under continuous deformation. For example, you can see that the square can, for topology, the square, the circle, and this weird shape in here all the way on the right, they're the same. Why? Because think about it as you're blowing air inside the object, so these corners here on the side will smoothen out and become eventually a circle. Okay, but for topology, those three objects are not the same as this weird eight-shaped object. Okay, you cannot deform a circle to this object or this square to this object. Okay, now let us move one step further and look at differential geometry. When you hear differential geometry, you think about differentiability. So in some sense, you want your deformation now not just to be continuous, but to have a derivative. And when we say derivative exists, means we don't want corners, as we, like most of you saw in calculus one probably. Whenever you have a corner, you don't have a derivative. So that's why for differential geometry, the circle, the ellipse, and this weird shape are the same, but not the square. So you have more restrictions than what you have like from topology. Let's push it more. Now, Riemannian geometry. Riemannian geometry, you ask for more. You want these distances to be preserved. You want the distances to be the same. If you want the distances to be the same, then the circle and the ellipse are not the same anymore. So we have more rigidity. Okay, so I'll focus mainly on topology. That means we are deforming things continuously now. So under continuous deformation, if we want to capture something within an object, we basically throw a loop inside it and try to tighten it and see what we catch. Okay, for an example of a continuous deformation, you see this curve gamma 0 can be continuously deformed to this curve gamma 1. So basically what we are doing, we're playing the cowboy. Okay, so you're throwing a lasso and you want to catch something, and I wish that whenever someone is presenting something in geometry, they would play some background music of, Western movie or something, that would be fun. Anyway, so mathematicians, sometimes they think about themselves as cowboy. I don't know if everyone thinks the same. Maybe Amir does. So, okay. So let's play the cowboy. Let's take the disk and throw a circle in it or a loop in it. We see that we can shrink it and deform it continuously to reach a point. So basically we catch nothing. But now let's take a punctured disk, which is a disk, and we remove a point from it. Then if I throw this loop, the blue one, I catch nothing. But if I throw this loop, by tightening it, I see I'm catching something there. So this shape, the shape of the disk and the shape of the punctured disk, they cannot be deformed to one another. Here I catch nothing, here I catch something. Okay? Let us take another example of the sphere, two-dimensional sphere. And you throw a loop in there. If you look at it from the top, this is the picture on the right on the top, you see you can deform it also continuously to a point. So basically you catch nothing on the sphere. All right. Let us start by something simple to just have an idea about what's going on, really. Let us take the example of a circle. You can go around it clockwise a number of times or counterclockwise a number of times, knowing that going forward and backward will cancel, these loops. They cancel each other. So we can describe them, or we can describe these loops by the integers. Okay, so if I say like, k or 3, that means I went 3 times clockwise. -2, I went 2 times counterclockwise. So I can describe them by the integers. Another shape now is the donut or the torus. In the donut, you see that I have here one loop that I cannot deform to a point, and another loop that I cannot deform to a point. And those two loops, I cannot deform them to one another. Again, I can do the same operations that I did for the circle, for each loop. Also, I have something interesting here. I can go, if I go one time around A and then around B, it's the same as going around B and then around A. Okay? So it's like we are dealing here not with the integers, but z cross z. That means if I give you 1, 2, it means I went 1 time through A and 2 times through B. All right, let us compare it to another simple object. Take 2 circles. They are touching in one point. So you have the loop A and the loop B. Of course, you can do the same as the circle for each one of the loop A or the loop B isolated. But there is a problem here. Going 1 time through A and then through B is not the same as going through B and then through A. It's not the same. You cannot deform one to the other. So how can we describe the loops of this shape? And this is something that actually computer scientists likes it a lot. So maybe Fred will like it. It is this shape, which is the free group of all generators. So basically going through A means you move horizontally, and going through B, you move vertically. So 1 time through A and then through B, you reach this point. But 1 time through B and then 1 and through A, you reach this point. So they are not the same. Okay? All right. So
I like it.
You do, right? But why also you like it? Because it's also the coding language. It's the words A and B, so 0 and 1s, right?
I liked it even before then.
Oh, that's even better. Okay. Okay, so yet a different surface. Instead of taking one hole like the torus, you can take multiple ones. And you can see that the loops C1, C2, C3, and all of them, they cannot be deformed to each other. So when topologists want to have fun sometimes, they want to study shapes like this, the Alexander Horn sphere. I would recommend you look at it, okay? You just go nuts. But just to give you a taste of what people do in their, free time, Okay, so in particular, the previous process tells us that we cannot continuously deform the sphere into a torus, or a torus into a surface with multiple holes. Why? Because there are some loops there that do not have the same property as the loops in the different shape. So this process allows us to study other weird objects. In fact, it tells us if 2 objects are different, since it happens sometimes that they can have the same loop properties, but they cannot be deformed one into another. So it's good to distinguish it and telling that these two shapes are different. So this loop property is the first fundamental construction in what we call in algebraic topology the fundamental group. Okay? Why do we care about this fundamental group? Because it's a very powerful tool. In particular, it gives impressive results in studying these familiar yet weird objects, namely the nuts. Okay, and here basically, if you knot, I don't know, if you take something and you knot it in two different ways, you want to distinguish if one knotting way can be deformed to the other one or not. Okay? So, but the natural question you might ask is, why should I care about this? You know, I'm not doing math. I don't really care about knotting and unknotting, you know, unless I'm a Boy Scout or something. Okay? But what if I told you that you should care about this presentation? And I'll give you a reason why. So proteins and DNA have tendency to form knots by themselves depending on their kind. So certain proteins, they tend to knot themselves in a certain way. So in order to identify certain proteins or DNA portions, you need to classify these knots. If I classify the knots, I can know from the knot what is the protein corresponding to it, or what is the DNA portion corresponding to it, or what is this gene sequence that corresponds to it. It allows us to detect genes or to detect some viral DNAs, within the human DNA, for example, and it helps us a detection sometimes for viruses. This is an example of certain proteins, some research that's been done by biologists with help of mathematicians, and they're not type here. Okay, another application of this deformation process is facial recognition. In airport screening, it is practical to identify people even after going through a facial reconstruction or under disguise. And when we say like facial reconstruction, it's a continuous deformation. So if you want to know the core property of a face, you need to study what are the parts of the face that doesn't move or it's stable under deformation. So many programs and many softwares are designed in a way to detect these parts that do not move, or to detect these core properties of faces in order to be able to identify certain people. All right, so now let us go back to math. I'll give you a three-dimensional object, or what mathematicians call a manifold, or a three-dimensional surface, you can call it, that has no boundary, that is closed. And I tell you, it has no holes inside. That means if I take every loop in there, I can contract it or can shrink it to a point. Can you characterize it? That's a question. Well, in 1904, Poincaré said, yes, we can characterize any three-dimensional closed manifold that has no holes can be deformed to the sphere. This is the guy. He looks classy, Poincaré, you know. So, and he's very smart, by the way, very smart. Okay, so let's go back to some history here. So this conjecture was stated in 1904 and was open for a long time. It was classified as one of the Millennium Prize problems. That is, if you can solve it first, you will win $1 million. So that's an easy way to get money, you know, for people who want to major in math. Here is your way to to being rich. But unfortunately for you, this was solved in 2006 in a series of papers presented by Gregory Perelman. So too bad for you, you lost $1 million. And this is the guy, Gregory Perelman. And I would recommend that you read a little bit about him and about the whole story about giving him the money and refusing the money. And it's fun to read about it, okay? It's really interesting gossip. Okay, so since we are talking about shapes, what is the shape of our universe? It's a classical question. This question was deeply investigated and still being investigated. And for instance, if we take into account the Big Bang theory, which is one of the theory, then there are three possibilities, more or less. The Big Crunch, the continue forever universe, or the Big Chill, all depending on the curvature or how curved is our universe. Okay, and there is also another shape which is mixing two of these types, which thinks of the universe as a torus or a donut. Okay. Now, there are also, in order to boost your imagination, there is also another theory of the multiverse or universe bubbles. What happens if you study the evolution of the universe and you want to see what happens? Sometimes the universe bubbles into other smaller universes, maybe. Okay. So it's also a theory that's in there. So one way of understanding the shape of an object is actually to see the behavior of a natural function that lives on it. Okay. For example, I want to understand an object M. I consider a function from M to R, and I study its critical points. The critical points are the points where I have a horizontal tangent. That's where the derivative vanishes. This process actually allows us to reconstruct the shape of M. This is what is known as Morse theory. Morse theory tells you, okay, if you study one function living on a shape, then you can know what the shape is. It's a very strong theory. So let's try to do that with the universe, right? Let's take some natural function that lives in the universe and try to study its behavior and see what we end up with. Okay, one good function or functional to study is the total curvature, also called the Hilbert-Einstein functional. And we have in our department now two people, fully invested in this. So they probably know more about it, which is you take the curvature and you integrate it. Or to have a better understanding of the different interaction of the universe, one could consider the standard model. Actually, it's a very easy model. I gave this model in my Calculus 1 test this week, which looks like this. I'm lying, by the way. I can never give it to my students, okay? But the standard model looks basically like this. It encapsulates more or less all the known interactions of particle physics. And you can identify some of them. For example, you can identify gravity in here. And in here, you can see this is the fermionic interactions. And there is a lot in there. I cannot go through it. I don't fully understand it too. Okay, so this is one of the models that mathematicians and physicists study in order to understand also more or less the shape of the universe. One of the easy ones that was studied is the Yang-Mills functional, and it tells us a lot about the properties of the shape that's built in it. Another one is the total curvature, and there is like also different coupling of these functional that can tell us a lot about the shape of the universe. I know I went a bit fast. I shouldn't have, but anyway, in conclusion, in the end, we can see how these fields of studying deformation of shapes, namely topology or geometry, is of extreme importance everywhere. Biology, physics, computer science, airport security, everywhere topology is needed or geometry is needed at least. The good news is that there is a lot to be done and many questions to be answered. And for the ones interested in making some money, there are still few millennium problems that are open there. Each one is worth $1,000,000. So, you can get started if you want. Okay. All right. I will stop here and thank you for your attention. And I'll be open for questions.